Stephen Morin was a man who was adept at flying under the radar. His drug addiction took over his life, and he soon became a man outside the law. He had a few arrests for theft and drug possession, but he upped the ante by kidnapping a 14-year-old girl, raping and torturing her before releasing her. For this crime, he was put on the FBI's most wanted list. But Stephen was one step ahead of the authorities, as he frequently used different aliases to mask his identity. Under these multiple identities, he would go on a cross-country murder spree, all while being hunted by the FBI. Welcome to History's Biggest Villains. Stephen Morin was born into a poor family on February 19, 1951 in Providence, Rhode Island. Not much is known about his childhood, but once he became a teenager, he dropped out of school, got into drugs, and became a petty criminal. In the mid-60s, Stephen was arrested in Florida for car theft. He was convicted, spending some time in a juvenile detention facility. After being released in 1968, he left Florida and led a transient lifestyle, wandering across the country. Throughout the early 70s, he lived in the San Francisco Bay Area, constantly moving around and using various aliases while committing petty crimes. In 1972, Stephen stole another car and was caught with LSD. He was sentenced to 5 years probation. In 1976, Stephen was arrested for possession of a syringe and resisting arrest, but he was only given a year of probation because he used a fake ID. In September of that year, Stephen lured his sister's friend, a 14-year-old girl, to his San Francisco apartment. There, he tied her up and hung her from a ceiling hook before brutally raping her for several hours. Then he released her at a local shopping center. After it was determined that Stephen had fled across state lines to avoid capture, he was added to the FBI's most wanted list in 1977. Stephen then moved to Las Vegas under the alias Robert Ireland, where he met his future wife, a schoolteacher named Sylvia. While in Connecticut visiting her family, he went to the library at Yale University to browse the obituaries for men that were of similar age and appearance to him. He somehow obtained a birth certificate for a Robert Generoso, planning to use the name at a later date. A few months later, Stephen was arrested in Pleasanton, California for pulling a gun on two men after an argument. He gave another fake name to the police and was released from jail on a $500 bond. On September 25, 1979, Sheila Griffith, 22, was last seen leaving the Silver Nugget in Las Vegas with an unknown man. Her body was found on November 27th in the Mojave Desert near the Nevada state line, covered by a sleeping bag. On January 16, 1980, Susan Belote, 18, was reported missing when she failed to return to her Las Vegas home after going shopping. Her body was found May 26 near Bloomington. Police say that a large stone had been placed on top of the body. An autopsy failed to establish the cause of death. However, the examiner said apparent damage inflicted on the victim's neck tissue led him to suspect that the victim was strangled. In June 1980, Cheryl Daniels was shot to death by Morin. She had dated him under the name Andrew Ireland. Her body was found 6 months later in the Utah desert. Stephen then stalked one of her friends, Sarah Peason, at her gas station job. Because of his numerous identities and disguises, Sarah had no idea that the man she knew as Robert Generoso was the same man her friend was dating when she disappeared. Sarah began to receive explicit beeper messages from her stalker and eventually went to the police when she found out it was Generoso. The police, knowing that Generoso was actually Morin, kept an eye on him, waiting to see what he would do next, while letting Sarah look through a mugshot book so she could point out her stalker. Later, the police told her that all the photographs were of one person in different disguises, Stephen Morin. In December 1980, now separated from his wife Sylvia, Stephen called, telling her that he was leaving Las Vegas. He didn't tell her where he was going, but it was suspected that he was in Hawaii. In the following weeks, Morin continued to call Sylvia to inquire about news on the murders, insisting that the police were setting him up. The timeline is vague from hereafter. However, at some point, Morin traveled back to the inner 48 and hitchhiked to Louisiana, where he found work as a machinist. He then migrated to Buffalo, New York, where he met Rita Xavier. Rita owned an antique shop, which Stephen convinced her to sell so they could buy a van to travel across the country. They purchased the van and started their travels, stopping in Denver to visit Rita's family. The couple decided to stay, and Morin found work as a painter. On November 6, 1981, he picked up 23-year-old Sheila Whalen. She would be found dead the next day. The couple left Colorado soon after and headed to Texas. On the way to their destination, Morin disappeared once again and attacked 21-year-old Jana Bruce in Corpus Christi. She was found stabbed to death in a room at the Mountain View Hotel in Lakewood, Colorado the next day. After leaving Colorado, Stephen and Rita headed back to Texas. Stephen left Rita for a while and abducted 23-year-old Pamela Jackson from her Corpus Christi apartment while she was on the way to pick up her son. He held her captive for 11 days, making her dye her blonde hair brown while sexually assaulting her multiple times a day. Rita didn't like how Morin looked at other women and was jealous of the charm he exuded, so she eventually left him. According to Rita's son, she knew nothing about the murders, and her son unsuspectingly helped soundproof the van before their trip. Morin quickly found another companion, 32-year-old Sarah Clark, who knew of his murders, and the couple traveled through Texas in Morin's van. On December 11, 1981, the couple arrived in San Antonio looking for a car to steal. They happened upon 21-year-old Carrie Scott and her friend, 25-year-old Drew Valdez. Stephen exited the van and shot both of them. Scott died on the scene, but Valdez was wounded. The police were on the couple's trail by this point and were following them from a distance. Finally, the police surrounded the hotel where they were living and stormed the room, where they found Pamela Jackson, who had been held hostage for almost 2 weeks. Sarah Clark was captured, but Morin evaded arrest by escaping out of a bathroom window. On December 12th, he kidnapped another woman, 30-year-old Margaret Mayfield, and held her hostage for hours in his car. During this time, she recited Bible quotes to him and finally convinced him to let her go. He released her in Austin, where he planned to take a bus to Fort Worth. He wanted to try to meet televangelist Kenneth Copeland, but he was captured at the bus station before boarding his bus. On December 29, 1981, a $100,000 bond was set for Morin on the attempted capital murder charge of Drew Valdez, and he was ordered held without bond at the Bexar County Jail for the capital murder charge of Carrie Scott. Morin was charged with the murders of Carrie Scott and Jana Bruce, since the evidence was the strongest in these two cases. After withdrawing his appeals and pleading guilty, he was convicted and sentenced to death in February 1984. Later on, he was additionally convicted of killing Cheryl Daniels before being extradited to Colorado on charges of killing Sheila Whalen. He was sentenced to death again at the end of 1984. Morin was also supposed to be later extradited to Utah to stand trial for other killings he supposedly committed there, but this never occurred. In total, Stephen was investigated for 48 violent murders committed in the states of Utah, Colorado, Nevada, Washington, Idaho, Indiana, Missouri, Pennsylvania, Texas, New York, and California. In Nevada alone, Morin was a person of interest in 8 murder cases. After his conviction, Morin converted to Christianity, even becoming pen pals with Margaret Mayfield, the final woman he kidnapped before his arrest. His execution date was scheduled for March 1985. Shortly before this, Stephen stated that he didn't want to appeal for a new trial or postpone the execution, which conflicted with his lawyer David Goldstein, who filed a petition for a forensic examination on his client, since he showed signs of mental retardation. The application was rejected. Morin was executed by lethal injection shortly after midnight on March 13, 1985 at the Huntsville unit in Texas in the presence of his victim's relatives and his girlfriend. His last meal was steak, baked potatoes, butter, green pea salad, banana pudding, and coffee. His final words were, "Father, forgive these people, for they know not what they do. Forgive them as you have forgiven me, and I have forgiven them. Lord Jesus, I commit my soul to you." Before his execution, Morin was described as being in a happy mood. Due to his history of drug abuse, the executioners were forced to stick both of his arms and legs with needles for nearly 45 minutes before they found a suitable vein. He was pronounced dead at 12:55 a.m., becoming the 6th man to be executed by lethal injection in Texas since the method was reintroduced in 1982. That's just crazy. And I feel like since he had so many aliases, he probably did kill 48 people. You got all these aliases, you were able to fool so many people. And it's like, this is back in the 70s where it's really hard to fact check who people are. It's not like you can go into a database like now, where you knew this person's information and you knew, oh, this guy did this and that. Like, I feel like he definitely killed a lot of people. He definitely did. The fact that he did that, he would kill one person, go to another state, kill 2 more people, go to another state. He goes from Texas to Hawaii to California to New York to Utah. This dude's in every state. Like, the ability to move around like that, and the fact that you're like a transient, he doesn't have like a known address. So he's just able to just slide underneath the radar. It kills me how these people all of a sudden they just want to find God now that they know that they're going to die. Oh, I'm going to die in 2 weeks. Oh, I've accepted Jesus as my Lord and like, come on, dude. But this is a case that really doesn't get talked about, man. I felt like this was something that really should have been brought more to the light because, of course, there's a lot of murders in Texas. But this one seems to fly under the radar for some reason. Thank you for watching. Leave a like, hit that subscribe button if you're new to my channel. Also, do not forget to turn on my post notifications if you haven't already. Thank you for all the support, guys. Be safe. Stay on the grind. I'm out. Peace.